So last week, as we were recording, Keir Starmer announced his fifth and last mission at a college in Kent. And this one was to break down barriers to opportunity at every stage. We didn't actually get to talk about it at the time because we were recording while he was saying it. Andrew Marr, our political editor, has done a piece on it and a piece to camera as well, which you can find on YouTube. But I wanted to hear from you guys what you thought of that fifth and final mission. Then we can get into the rest of them. Rachel?
Yeah, I think it's this one that probably talks most about Labour's values, isn't it? Social mobility, breaking the class ceiling, bigger focus on of vocational education and trying to improve social mobility throughout the country. So from what I can gather, it's gone down very well over the last week or so. But it's kind of part of all the 5 missions, and you won't find huge divides, I don't think, with a lot of what the Conservative Party wants to do. But I think sort of Keir Starmer's case at the moment is kind of one where he is trying to say that he's best able to run public services and bring about, more change more effectively, more quickly, by reforming how Whitehall works, basically, as part of the 5 missions. I think he started the year saying he wanted to hand control back to communities. But I think what the 5 missions kind of talk more about is sort of how Labour would run a government, how they would kind of make these priorities and ask departments to kind of keep to them. So it would kind of change sort of approach from the current siloed position where each department has its own priorities. It seems to be more of a kind of centralised overall reform of Whitehall.
Yes, and it's interesting that that's the approach that they're taking, because first of all, if you reform the way government works, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making huge spending commitments, for one thing. But secondly, these are the things that actually endure. So when you change things institutionally or, even regulatory changes as well, they're the things that are less easy for governments in future to repeal. Whereas, if you fiddle around with tax or, come up with these kind of redistributive income-based policies, they're things that can be quite easily undone in future.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Labour believes is most appealing about its 5 missions is the big focus on long-termism. Yeah. And so that's, they're talking about fastest sustained growth in the G7. That's something that they're not going to be able to say that they're probably going to do immediately, but it's something that feel that they can keep people on the same page about for a sustained amount of time. And a lot of what we've seen in the last few years has been, a lot of chaos, a lot of change, 2 changes of Prime Minister in the last year or so. It's kind of an antidote to the chaos of the last few years. So that focus on long-termism is what might help them win a second general election potentially, but also an offer they think that they can convince people with this time round.
Zoe, what do you make of the missions overall?
I think the missions are interesting because when they came about, Starmer's announcement of the 5 missions came pretty close to Sunak's announcement of his 5 pledges. Yeah. And I think that has been a little bit problematic for Labour in terms of differentiating their offer and making it quite clear to the public how their offering would be different from Sunak's. But actually, I think when you compare the two, Starmer and Labour's 5 missions that do seem a lot more ambitious. So as Rachel said, they want to secure the highest growth in the G7. That's significantly different from Sunak's pledge to halve inflation, which obviously when Sunak announced it, we all thought, oh, well, that's going to happen anyway. And now it doesn't. That looks a bit more in question.
And it's out of his control as well. Whereas growth, there's a lot of levers that governments can pull to try and increase growth, not least, house building and developing in general.
Yeah, there are definitely levers. I think some of the, not criticisms, but some of the things that have been suggested about that particular mission is that obviously when you want to secure the highest growth in the G7, that's in comparison to other countries. And although you might be in control of what you can do in your country, you can't be in control of what other states are doing. So that might be a slightly trickier one. But as you say, there are more things that Starmer can do. The other 4 missions, I think, are ones that he very much hoped would appeal to the general public. So things like kind of fixing the NHS, bringing down A and E waiting times and getting higher GP satisfaction ratings, safer streets. That was a big thing when it was happening because it was all about kind of halving knife crime, reducing violence against women and girls, and basically tackling this feeling in communities that their streets are not really safe anymore. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the sort of most contentious, or the one that's had a bit more kind of problems around it, has been their sort of clean energy mission, which was originally the 28 billion a year for green growth, which has now been sort of slightly rowed back on. So I guess that one has been the slightly trickier one, because it does seem like Labour has maybe gone back on it a little bit, or there's been some issues within the shadow cabinet over the money and how that's going to work in practice. But I do think these missions appeal to what voters want. I think they appeal to voter priorities, and I think they seem ambitious enough in comparison with what the Conservatives are offering.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that slight tension over the climate pledges, because there has been some rowing back. There were stories over the weekend as well of Keir Starmer saying that he hates tree huggers. And we saw actually at the fifth and final mission, while he was announcing it, he had these kids standing behind him because he was at a college and it was all about education and improving opportunities for young people. And some of the kids on the stage happened to be part of this Green New Deal Rising campaign group. And they suddenly started protesting while he was speaking, saying, Green New Deal now, what about the 28 billion? Why haven't you met with us to speak about working our demands into the manifesto and all of this stuff? And there clearly is dissatisfaction perhaps among the young, as these young people, I spoke to them actually for a piece, were suggesting, but also about people who feel that Labour should be, more ambitious on climate change, perhaps reflect more what's going on in the US and throughout Europe as well in terms of big stimulus packages for green transition. That's something perhaps that is symbolic of the idea that these missions don't feel necessarily transformative and perhaps reflect too much what the Conservatives' priorities are in government as well.
I think there's a few things going on when it comes to the climate change position of the Labour Party. There are some factional tensions between Ed Miliband and other parts of the party, other parts of the shadow cabinet. As I understand it, Keir Starmer did not say, "I hate tree huggers." I think it might have been something closer to, "I'm not a tree hugger."
No, this is useful context. I'm glad I put it to you.
But I think what they would say on the 28 billion overall is that it was announced, and I think a lot of people were kind of surprised it was announced. A lot of people, Labour people, were surprised it was announced so long ago and was such a big figure. And in between then and now, we've obviously had Liz Truss's mini budget, which has affected interest rates, which has affected the economy overall and what they might be able to do. And the position is that they're not going to be able to do it in the first couple of years, but potentially towards the end of the first Parliament, they would be able to bring it in. The other argument is that they would struggle to find stuff to spend that amount of money on within the first couple of years, because it is a pretty huge amount. But on the other hand, people who are very, very supportive of greening the economy within the Labour Party kind of feel just very frustrated that the one radical thing that they wanted to go out and talk to the electorate about has kind of been, scaled down somewhat. But it's caution first all of the time in the Labour Party, because they haven't been in power for 13 years. And they're just concerned that, that feeling of 1992 could begin to creep back in, and they're terrified of that. So they want to make sure that what they have to sell to the electorate is a credible offer.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.